a 6-step instructional approach to responding to challenging behavior. And the goal here is that in the perfect world, this would be the wouldn't it be great if category of life. Wouldn't it be great if every single person that interacted with kids knew this 6-step approach? Family members, paraprofessionals, gen ed teachers, special education workers, custodians, cafeteria workers, school psychologists, administrators, because we want to make sure that we are building skill sets for educators to have the most comfortable set of planned responses for kids. And if you are new to Ci3T, short story of this, we're just going to set the stage for this. You don't have to have Ci3T in place to be able to use this approach that we're going to teach you tonight. But in the perfect world, it would be great if you did. If you had clarities on what kids needed to know in terms of what needs to be taught and what's going to get practiced, what's going to get acknowledged and reinforced. And as educators coming into education or changing buildings or changing grade levels, part of the benefit of having a Ci3T implementation plan is it creates clarities on what you're going to teach, how you're going to teach it, what the instructional time looks like, all the low intensity strategies we talked about last time that we want people to have in their repertoire so they can increase engagement and limit counterproductive behavior. Also, a key part of what you're doing right now, and this is important for tonight's topic, is if you are in a building that has stated expectation, remember these are not just a decoration on your wall. This is your instructional tool. This is, especially in Ci3T schools, these are the things that the vast majority of adults in the building said, wow, we really think kids need to know these to be successful. David Royer and Katie Pelton and Wendy Oakes and others have done a lot of work looking at school-wide expectation survey for specific settings, free access tool that you can give to people, including bus drivers, cafeteria workers, to find out what they think should be the priorities. Will you pop in the chat right now if you have one of these in the building where you work or the buildings that you support? This is part of how we create clear, kind expectations for student behavior. The third part of that base of Ci3T is a commitment to social and emotional well-being. And in the perfect world, there's a validated resource that's brought in. And then so like all the high schools would be teaching the same set of skills, all the middle schools, and then all the elementary schools. So based on what's developmentally appropriate, same for preschool. But in the perfect world, that is what is offered in a Ci3T system. And the benefit of having that clarity at tier 1 is it creates a huge level of transparency about how to provide integrated instruction. A lot of times people will say things, I can't even get to my academics and I'm spending all this time just trying to manage challenging behavior. And I'm watching Joni nod her head. It's a former teacher. So that is the reality of the situation. That's why tonight's topic is so important. It is the art and science of not only teaching expected behavior, but having a clear plan for when things get challenging. And it's not if it's going to happen, the question is when. And we want to do it so that we can manage challenging behavior in a respectful way, honestly, that shows kids that we care. We want them to be happy at school. We want everybody to feel safe. We want to make sure that we feel confident and comfortable as well. And with all that in place, still after tonight, there you know that there will be kids that will have tier 2 and tier 3 needs. And it doesn't mean it's not a great teacher. It doesn't mean it's not a great school. That is an expectation. We just have to have a planned response for what to happen. But I think tonight's topic is really important to make sure that even when we know that all the things that are supposed to be happening in tier 1 are in place and people are on board with the goals and they think the procedures are going to work, we still will have a planned need for ongoing professional learning to respond to challenging behavior. In some early work that we did at the beginning of this grant funded by the Institute for Education Sciences, and shout out for educational funding, the top 3 things that people said they needed is support for managing acting out behavior, also having supports to support kids with internalizing issues, and a plan for supporting teaching kids social and emotional well-being skill sets. So you're in the right goal, the right objective to make sure that we're painting this picture so that when we are looking to see what's happening in student performance, we also want to match that with what the needs are for the adults. So a hallmark feature of Ci3T is that we have data-informed professional learning for the adults and data-informed instruction for the students. So none of this is a guesswork. And right now, I want you to know, you can be the first people to hear this publicly. We just finished analyzing data from a large project. We were looking with people that are very experienced in Ci3T and looking at how teachers fare over time in these systems. And we learned that schools where they were anywhere from their 3rd to 11th year of implementation, treatment integrity was pretty high, like above 80% in fall and spring over 2 consecutive years. And people continued to believe in the goals and the procedures and the outcomes. And I will tell you also, treatment integrity actually predicted teachers' sense of efficacy. So by putting this plan in place, it's not causal, but it was predictive of how people felt in terms of their effectiveness as a teacher. That's huge, because we want to make sure that we're creating these really healthy and comfortable learning environments for everybody. So tonight, as we are doing this standalone topic, if you have access to a Ci3T system like does in her district and she coordinates that, that is fantastic. And if you don't, if you are somebody that is here as a solo educator or somebody that want to take things back, 100% you've got what you need, provided that there are clear expectations in the classroom. So that is the piece that if that's not yet in place, we want to make sure that happens. And there's a new brief, relatively new in like the last year from What Works Clearinghouse. It's all about like K through 6 settings, I believe, that will help you to also solidify that. So tonight, we're going to break it down. I will be singing and dancing throughout the evening. Guys, I say break it down. But we're going to start with describing what these 6 steps are. And we want to be really practical so that when you walk out tonight, you will know what these 6 are. It's kind of like what not to wear for clothing as well. Raise your hand if you've ever seen that show. Anyway, we want to make sure that you know what to do for each of those steps and what not to do at each of those steps, because timing is very important in managing challenging behaviors, like offering a kid a choice when they're really escalated, not a great choice. Then we are going to also conclude, we're going to hear at the end of the evening from Dave Royer, who's going to talk to us about what comes next. And I do want to let you know we have 2 more sessions for Empower. They're going to be focused on tiered support specifically. You're going to hear for the first time a whole new intervention that we just finished 3 years worth of testing on. It's called Recognize, Relax, Record. It's all aimed at supporting kids that have anxious feelings, teaching them to understand what their bodies feel like, how to learn strategies to manage it, and then importantly, how to apply those skills. If you are also somebody, and shout out to you if you are, who's in a school system that is doing the new version for the tiered fidelity inventory that's been led by Jen Freeman, Kent McIntosh, and others from the PBS National Center, this content tonight is exceptionally well aligned. So write this down if you're doing the TFI, the new version, 1.7 and 2.5. And remember, this presentation is posted for you. That'll help you make those connections. So I hope you consider yourself welcome. We are truly glad that you are here. We're going to build a little bit of a base, and then we're going to jump into that 6-step instructional approach, and then we're going to wrap it up with how to connect kids to more intensive support. Tonight, you will need a handout. So if you go onto the tab that says Professional Learning, scroll down, open that little folder up, you will see a few things. One, you will see in the bottom section a handout. You'll also have a copy of this exact presentation if you want it, a copy of a suggested pacing sheet, and an agenda should you decide to share this with others. So, all right, we care deeply about behavior. Behavior is everything, right? It's how you greet people, it's your pro-social interactions, it's your correct words per minute, it's the number of words that you write per day. Behavior is everything. And behavior does not occur in a vacuum. I do understand that sometimes it looks like the behavior came out of nowhere when a kid explodes, but there's a lot of things that can be learned about what happens right before a challenging behavior happens, also called a target behavior, and what happens right after. And I want to tell you, truly, one of the best things about thinking about the ABCs, the basic understandings of behaviors and antecedent behaviors and consequences, is that these behaviors we're talking about tonight are learned behaviors. So that's great news, because we as educators can shape the contingencies. We can shape the things that come before behaviors occur, and we can shape the things that come after. And the consequences, we'll talk about this, are not bad things. It's just what happens after a certain behavior happens. If I smile at you and you smile back at me, the consequence of my smile is that I gained access to positive social reinforcer. So as we're taking a step into how this works, and I know his team and I have had conversations about the fact that all of Ci3T is theoretically grounded in applied behavior analysis, that it is based on these scientific principles of behavior. And I have to tell you, this gives me and gave me great confidence and great comfort as an educator to know that My first response to challenging behavior is going to be one of the best predictors as to whether or not a kid escalates or if they de-escalate, if they calm down. And that by building these systems where everybody understands how behavior is shaped intentionally and unintentionally, and how to truly use a good reinforcement system well. So it's like not like you're making it rain in a club. We want to use those tickets contingent upon a student exhibiting expected behavior that you'd like to see more of. And it needs to be sincere. So it's a gift to get this clarity about what is expected, and you teach it and you practice it, and kids get acknowledged for meeting those expectations. And we want to clear up a very common misunderstanding. Sometimes when people look at Ci3T, they think there are no consequences. There are 100% consequences. There are things that come after behavior. That is the nature of the entire system. So if you have the gift of having a Ci3T implementation plan in your building or in your school, and now in your state, we've been recently doing a lot of work with different state departments, that expectation matrix that is posted all throughout the building, in hallways, in classrooms, in cafeterias, during arrival and dismissals. Many schools have them on the bus. Sometimes they're given to substitute teachers as little bookmarks. Those are intended to be a teaching tool. You are displaying the expected behavior, and then you're reminding kids of what's expected before you enter that next setting. So like when was a teacher, there could have been an expectation matrix in her classroom, and it could have been, all right guys, before we head out right now for your next class, who can remind me of one way you're going to show some respect in the hallway? That's right, stand up, push up a chair, line up in the door. But I'm using that as a teaching tool. And when that is in place for all key settings, and when all the adults have a chance to weigh in on what this is, that is a gift for kids, because they get an opportunity to get feedback, not just from their primary classroom teachers, but from everybody that steps into that context. And remember, families should be involved in the development of those expected behaviors, because when a kid earns a ticket, the family member needs to be able to say, hey, what'd you get that for? And we need them to know, like, oh, I did a great job in the hallway. I was standing on the right-hand side and I was being relatively quiet. So we want to make sure that there's clarity on what the expected behavior is. And then that can get taught, practiced, and acknowledged in a number of different ways. You're seeing some pictures right now, real pictures from real schools. The one on the left with cougars, that was from middle school, and all the kids got not only the tickets, but they got wristbands. The educators wore them as well. There were places where the students could make decisions about either to turn them into a bucket, like what you're looking at right now, for a chance to win something, or it might be that they save things up to purchase something, so that it's not necessarily a chance as to whether or not I get it, they can actually earn it. And those Ci3T parking spots that you see at the bottom, those were actually for students at a high school. They could enter for a chance to win a Ci3T parking spot, which was even closer than the principal's parking spot. There was a little misunderstanding at one point where they thought the parking spots were for our research teams when we came to visit. Not true. They were for the students. So when you think about Tier 1, this beautiful base that you have built in your integrated tiered system, it is the base part for the positive behavior intervention and support is clarity on what is taught and expected at Tier 1. And there's also a plan for what to do when challenges arrive. And again, the stage is all set in applied behavior analytic principles. So when challenging behavior does happen, we want to be the Nancy Drews of student behavior. We want to ask ourselves what happened right before the behavior happened and what might have been removed in time and place. That's all collectively referred to as an antecedent. There's things that sometimes that happen that are removed in time and place that impact how you start your day. It's true for us as adults. It's true for kids. It's true for everybody. And sometimes it's immediate things like lack of clarity on instructions, or not having a check for understanding, or not having the skills that I need to do it's after. All those things can set the stage for not feeling like you're optimally engaged. I feel so much better when I've slept well, I work out in the morning, I eat a good breakfast that does not involve Oreo cookies, and I'm ready to go. If it's a different path paved, if you haven't slept last night, you forgot to lay out your clothes, what you planned to wear didn't really fit super comfortably, so you got to get something, with more of the pull-up pants from the pandemic, or you got to call in sick. There's a lot of things that happen that set the stage for that day. And then when a challenging behavior does happen, look around. What happens right away? Does another kid laugh to reinforce it? Does a teacher reinforce it? Does a teacher accidentally roll their eyes and think, oh my gosh, I already told you that? All those things count. What you do and what you don't do counts. So when we talk about the ABCs, we're not talking about the basics. We are literally talking about what set the stage for it and what is the thing that reinforced it and increased the future probability of it happened again. And again, as we're seeking to understand function, keep in mind, kids are going to do things to either access or to avoid. So when we start talking about escalating behavior and responding to challenging behavior, we don't want to accidentally reinforce a student by bouncing them out of class as a consequence. If their big goal is to escape the classroom environment, you just reinforce that behavior, it's likely to get far worse. I was in Georgia getting to work with a wonderful group of people. There was about 250 people. And I started singing at one point, and a couple people laughed. That made me then do a little bit more singing. And by the end of it, it was pretty much show tunes with Ci3T, because my behavior was maintained by attention at that point. And kids are not complicated. The bottom line is we just have to figure out what is maintaining that challenging behaviors. And not next time, but the time after, we're going to hear from Elise Saracen. I always call this her second child. And she's going to go into great depth about how to work at the top of the triangle with kids that have really intensive intervention needs. And she's going to be sharing about a very practical model that Wendy Oakes, Eric Common, David Royer, myself, and many others on this team and others have all built through the years on how to support that. But the short story for right now is today we are at tier 1. So when you think about these strategies that we're talking about, having clarity on instructional delivery, having clarity about how we teach expected behavior, and making sure that we're really doing great differentiated instruction so that kids can access the instructions and can engage in the learning activity you want. I still say to this day, the best behavioral support you can give a child is a really well-crafted lesson plan, right? And I'm watching Wendy go like this. This means it's serious. When her lips are pursed like that and nodding, that is total convergent validity. But it's true. If I've got pacing that's on point, not too fast, not too slow, and I've got kids in their zone of proximal development, we're good to go. And even when that happens, there's still going to be challenges that happen. And so as educators, we just have to be ready for it and respond in a way that communicates clarity, kindness, and calmness. So as we think about this, many of you already have this tree, this like flow chart that you've seen about what gets managed in a classroom and what gets managed in the office. In many Ci3T schools, you will see these 6 steps right there. So before you start responding, like with a major or minor office discipline referral, we want everybody to know, show empathy. Keep instruction moving forward so that you're not putting a lot of attention on a child who's struggling. And then acknowledging other kids that are meeting expectation, because I want to teach every child in that classroom or that building to know the best way to get my attention is to be engaged and to be kind and to be meeting expectations. And then I'm going to do some redirection, reteaching, and give them a second so you're not like hovering while it's waiting. And then as soon as they get back engaged, don't be afraid to acknowledge them. And this is the part we're going to break down tonight. But before we do, we're going to pop into a breakout room and pretend to have this first conversation with your coach. So how do you currently respond to challenging behaviors? How well is that working for you? And if your school has a reactive plan, the thing you're supposed to do when the wheels fall off the bus, what does that look like? So right now, we are going to go into breakout rooms with a coach, and you're going to get a chance to talk for a few minutes. So we'll catch you back in a little bit. Have a good time.
So now we're going to dive into each of the steps of this 6-step instructional approach for responding to challenging behavior. Like Kathleen pre-corrected, when it does occur, because every day is not a perfect day. And often whenever we think of challenging behavior, what forefronts the minds of a lot of people are those externalizing behaviors. So those are behaviors that are really outward and aggressive and easily observable and distracting. And that is great. And this 6-step process definitely addresses those concerns. But there is another category of students or students that have both of these at the same time called internalizing behavior. So those are students with, they might be more anxious or shy or withdrawn. And so sometimes we want to decrease those behaviors for the externalizing students, but for the internalizing students, we might want to see an increase in those behaviors. So engaging in work more, being more on task. So this approach can work for both of those different major challenges of childhood behavior. And we've set the scene, it is at a tier 1 level. So it's for all students in any classroom. It's not just general education students that this can work with. Anytime instruction is being provided. So it might even be in a faculty meeting or a research meeting or anywhere that you're trying to give instruction, and challenging behavior might be occurring. So what we're going to go over today is each of the 6 steps, and all of the materials, all of the infographics and the videos and the handouts that you see throughout our presentation are free and publicly available in our 6-step module, which we'll have some time today to explore a little bit further. But if you see us go through this and they're like, oh, I really want to go back and look at that or share that out, they are all available through the website. So as we go through each of these 6 steps, we'll talk about the parts of them and how to implement them. But what I really love about this infographic is where the red box is it states out how we first respond is likely to influence whether the student's behavior escalates towards a crisis or de-escalates toward a calm state conducive to learning. So we can proactively plan when situations do arise, how we're going to address them, and how the adults respond is going to have trickle-down effects. So if I'm being really aggressive or loud or just overbearing, that's going to have a different outcome than if I had remained calm and used planned phrases and know my students and know what does and does not work for them. At this point in the school year, we're in February, hard to believe. So most of us, if you've been in the school year since the beginning of August or September, we know our students really well by this point, whether you're an administrator or a classroom teacher or a paraprofessional, or even sometimes our practicum students from the universities going into the classrooms know these students really well. And so picking up on what is going to tip you off, so to speak, about the smaller changes in their behavior can be really powerful. So these are each of the 6 steps. Like I said, we'll go through them a little bit more deeply, each of them. But the first one is to show empathy whenever a student is engaging in that challenging behavior during instruction, which is important to note that these steps are applicable to a lot of different scenarios when you're interacting with students or adults, but this specific strategy is for when instruction is being given. So the second step is to maintain that flow of instruction. The third one is to acknowledge other students meeting expectations. The fourth, to redirect and reteach expected behavior. The fifth, allow time and space. And then the sixth, recognize and reinforce expected behavior when demonstrated. And I fully believe that many of us are doing a lot of these steps to the greatest extent possible. And so you might say like, oh, like, yeah, I'm doing that, but how is this going to help? We're going to go deeper into what not to do, because you might be engaging in some of those behaviors, as well as why we're doing what we suggest you do. So as we go throughout each of these steps, it has a very predictable format. Like I said, what to do, why to do it, and what to avoid. And I forgot to mention that infographic that I said on the last slide with all of those different steps might be a helpful reminder to print these out. We said this in one of our professional learnings that we did for a district, and we give these suggestions out all the time, and then we happen to be able to go into the classroom and work with those teachers a little bit more deeply, and they were like, look, we printed out the infographic and it's by our door and we're so excited to use it, and they said that they were using it and it was a helpful reminder. So just thought I would plug that to see that another tool that you might use to remind yourself of these 6 steps. So our first step is to show empathy, and we define empathy as well as Merriam-Webster, is the action of understanding, being aware of, being sensitive to, and vicariously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experiences of another, of either the past or present, without having the feelings, thoughts, or experience fully communicated in an objective, explicit manner. That is a very long sentence. So, in summary, what that means is I am going to acknowledge that as a student in this scenario is having a day that is not typically what they experience. They might be showing feelings or using certain words or language or body language that's communicating that they're experiencing something that they don't normally do. And I'm going to use the same thing, body language, predictive, positive words, a calm state, to know that I acknowledge them and see them. Because even though we have these students most days, and we're with them, especially my elementary folks, all day long, we know what makes these students tick. But we also, sometimes I forget to, they are little people and they experience emotions deeply, just like we do as adults. And so for someone who is, engages in emotion a lot, me personally, it's always really nice when I see others recognizing that, oh, she is having a difficult day, or even though I'm typically positive, asking me what is going on with my day. I noticed you're, not being as engaging as you usually are. So, as we go throughout tonight's presentation, we are going to provide an illustration of how each of these 6 steps can be applied. So, I want you to pretend that we're in a setting of a 6th grade science classroom. It's about 8:30 in the morning, and it's October 25th. So, we've started off the school year. We've taught expectations. We're getting in the groove of things. The weather's changing. People are getting excited. Halloween's coming up. So our classroom teacher, her name is Mrs. Hill. Mrs. Hill heads over to Paul's desk. She sits in a chair next to him at the back of the room at the lab station. She makes sure to be respectful of Paul's personal space. In a confidential manner, Mrs. Hill says, "Hey, Paul, I noticed you're sitting away from the desk today. Is there something I can do to help you get started on the bell ringer?" "No," he mumbles into his crossed arms. "I don't want to do this right now." So, with that context in mind, in the chat, you can place A, B, or C. What could Mrs. Hill say to Paul in this scenario? A, do nothing and walk away. B, say, "You know the rules, move." Or C, respond with, "I understand, I'll check back in a minute." Great. C is what we would love to see people responding with, acknowledging them and giving them some time to come back, say that I'll be back here in a minute, and moving forward with instruction. Perfect. So a little bit more deeply into this showing empathy as the first step, what we want to focus on is privately connecting with that student. What you'd want to do, let's say it's the beginning of the class period, just like Miss Hill did, walk over to Paul. He already happened to be in a more secluded space in the back of the room. But what we want to do is keep instruction moving forward. So strategically pausing instruction at a natural break time and moving towards that student. I used to teach middle school, and so I often was at the front of my classroom. And so for me to stop instruction and then, let's say, walk to the middle of the classroom, everyone's eyes hopefully are up at the front of the board looking at me and listening to me teach, right? But especially if I'm on the move, they're going to be watching to where I'm going. And if that child has their head down or is engaging in some other sort of behavior that is atypical for them and not what we would see as academically engaged, they're going to feel maybe pretty ostracized or stick out, and they're not wanting the attention on themselves, or they might want that attention, and this is really reinforcing that behavior to continue going, because if Miss Bernard stops teaching and walks over to me, that is going to prolong us having to do, these really difficult math problems or write this essay. So it's also important when you're going over to that student to engage in neutral body language. We want to make sure that we're being respectful of them. And so that is going to mean not placing our hands on them, whether that's in a supportive embrace or anything. You can just place your hands at your side or maybe on their desk if that's appropriate, but just to not engage in that manner. And then verbally acknowledge and validate their emotions. A lot of times we don't know how these students are coming to school, what they just experienced beforehand, overnight if you're catching them in the morning, or if they've had some sort of a negative interaction on the bus. It could be that they just failed their math test in a middle school setting and now they're coming into science class and that's also really hard for them and they're already struggling. Just a number of things. They could have broken up with their boyfriend and class changes. We, just like all of us experience so many different things. So just to verbally acknowledge and validate their emotions is going to be really powerful. And why we do this, it's going to continue to build a relationship with that student, and it's less likely to lead to escalation. It also acknowledges that someone is showing that they care about me. They notice that my behavior is a little bit different today, and Ms. Bernard is providing the time and space. But I'm going to consider asking them, can we talk about this at a later time? Educators wear so many hats throughout the school day and school year. We're nurse, we're mom, we're teacher, we're best friend, we're a listening ear, we're counselor sometimes. But in this particular moment, we're trying to provide direct academic instruction. So that is what we're going to forefront. And so that might be asking the student to say, hey, I really want to talk to you about this. Can you write down on a sticky note what you want to talk about, just so we both don't forget, and then I'll walk with you to your next class. Or if the student isn't use written expression, maybe they can draw a picture or send you an email, just some way to provide a reminder that I see you and I hear you and I want to talk about it, but I want to do it in a time and a space that I have my full attention to provide for you. And during this math lesson or this science lesson is not an appropriate time right now. It also provides the student another opportunity to get on task, to re-engage back in the task at hand. And it shows the other students that, oh yes, okay, so Miss Bernard does go over and acknowledge students when they're having a bad day, but also the expectation is that she's going to try to get them to go back to the task at hand. Yes, so the next part is what to avoid, which as you've clearly listened to me on this step, I am guilty of being long-winded or overbearing, and then using harsh or public communication. The overbearing, I mentioned walking to that student and connecting privately. What's important is to go back to a setting that's natural for you. So if that means continuing to walk around the classroom as you're providing instruction, or moving to the lab station, or going back to a seat at the carpet with the students, just going back to your normal routines and practices. We have another infographic that is really helpful to have some differences between what it means to be long-winded and then be brief. So these might just be short phrases like, it looks like you're having a hard time getting started. I'll come back in a few minutes. So that was step 1, to show empathy. Step 2 is to maintain the flow of instruction. So what we're going to do is repeat the instructions in a positive and friendly tone and use physical movement. So like I talked about, going back to our flow of instruction, repeating the directions. Sometimes that's even helpful for myself as the teacher to say, okay, so first we're going to do this and next we're going to do that. Thank you so much for everyone getting out your Chromebooks for today, and then going about with your day. We're not lingering too much around that student who's having that challenging behavior. Why we're going to do this is that it's creating a solutions-based environment. So it's the expectation that even though Paul is having a challenging day, Mrs. Hill is going back back to the instruction because she does have those other students in the room that need to be instructed. What we're going to avoid is engaging in arguments and providing too much attention. I'm sure we can all have a story of where we've done just this. I taught middle school, and so my first few years were really a growing curve. And so what I I admittedly got into a lot of power struggles, and then you reflect at the end of the day and you're like, wow, I just got into an argument with a 12-year-old over some menial thing when I could have just let it go and continued on with my instruction. Um, all of that is just taking time away from really important instruction that needs to occur, and no one is winning at the end of that day. And it continue to just promote that cycle of, if I engage in this behavior, then she will argue with me, and then instruction doesn't move forward, and then maybe we don't have to take that test on Friday. And then that showcases that to other students as well. So we're not going to engage in arguments or provide too much attention for that student to continue on with that behavior. Okay, moving back into our illustration in our perfect bubble classroom world. Even though Mrs. Hill sees that Paul is sitting in the lab station, she keeps instruction moving forward by moving on to check on other students who are getting started on their assignments. She uses active supervision by moving through the classroom, visually scanning the room to see who might need help, and providing positive verbal interactions to acknowledge students who are meeting expectations. So what we're going to do next is a little activity on Zoom. So I'm going to go through different examples of empathy and examples of empathetic statements and examples of non-empathetic statements. So if you believe that this statement is empathetic, we're going to do a thumbs up. If you believe it's a non-example, we'll do a thumbs down. We good with that? Okay, love the head nodding. Okay, so our first one. Come on, just get it done. Empathetic or non-empathetic? I agree, non-empathetic, not really supportive. Our next one. It looks like you're having a hard time getting started. I'll come back in a few minutes. I agree, empathetic. How can I help you get started on your worksheet? Great, empathetic, you guys are pros. You need to stop wasting time. Please focus. Not very empathetic. I'm sorry, it seems like you're having a tough day. I'm going to take a lap and come back to check in. Yep, I agree, empathetic. Nothing. Give the student space. I see some up, some down. I think it depends on the context for the student and you knowing your student really well. But I would say if we're just ignoring it in this instance, it would be non-empathetic. But if you were giving them that space because they needed it, then it would be empathetic. Okay, we're going to do another activity, and this one involves the handout that Kathleen mentioned earlier. So we just went through a number of empathetic statements and non-empathetic statements, and we can give you these examples all day long and what to use in your different contexts. But what's important about using empathetic statements is that it's remaining authentic to you. And so I can say, you know, would you like to take a break? And if I repeat that very sarcastically, because that's my usual tone, that's not going to be very receptive for my students, and they might think that she's making fun of me or not being empathetic or supportive. And so what we're going to do for the next few minutes is there's the handout if you'd like to jot it down on that. We'll reference it a little bit later, so keep it handy with you. We're going to think of statements that you can use in your own context and setting that would be empathetic. So you can have those in your back pocket ready to go to use tomorrow.
Allison, thanks for setting up the first two steps. We're going to go through the next 4 steps, and then we will have a breakout room. So there are a couple of opportunities for you to engage in some chat and sharing. All right, so we are on step 3. Your language, in case this is news to anyone here, is a really powerful tool for promoting positive learning engagements for our students. And you likely remember something that a teacher said to you. We just the other day were talking about, I remember when my third grade teacher said, right? Like that's a really powerful, powerful skill or a powerful tool that we have. So behavior-specific praise actually leverages that power by you providing feedback to students when they're meeting your classroom expectations. And that's all it is, meeting expectations. And you are, by using behavior-specific praise, you're naming the student, you're giving some sort of acknowledgement, I like, which is not my favorite, but thank you, or I appreciate, and the specific behavior that you expect in your classroom. And if they keep doing that, it will continue to contribute to a positive learning environment. It also helps the students who are around them. So for example, when you compliment a student on having their supplies ready for the lab, it promotes others to look around to that student, check their own preparation to see if it needs adjustment, and then to adjust accordingly. So instead of going directly to the one who isn't prepared and saying, your lab materials are not out, I can simply say, Allison, thank you so much for having your lab materials out. I see you're ready to learn. Yeah, everybody else at that table is like, oh, I better get on that. And then they do it. And sometimes I work with little ones. Allison has more of those older kids, but they will say, you know, teacher, teacher, I did it too. Okay. And then provide them with reinforcement or acknowledgement of their behavior. They're asking for you to recognize them and be seen, and that's a good thing. Sometimes we say, if they ask for it, I'm not going to give it to them. No, give it to them. They're telling you that they need it and they're doing it in the appropriate way. And then we want to keep, you've heard Allison say this a couple of times, but we want to keep instruction moving forward, right? That's our sort of common goal, keep kids engaged in the learning. So we want to consider ways that students can engage in the lesson, clearly understanding what is expected of them. For example, when students are working, as in Mrs. Hill's class, you might check in with a few of the students who are actively engaged in that activity using behavior-specific praise or other kind of check-in or feedback. You can also use this signaling system, which Kathleen and I used to use a lot in our work. They're called communication cups, where students have a stack of 3 cups on their desk. The green one means, I understand and I'm working, I'm doing well, no need for help. Yellow means, I have a question, but I can keep moving forward until someone gets to me. And red means, I'm stuck and I can't move forward. Then teachers can quickly scan the room, see where kids are, where they need to intervene. We would suggest starting with a green cup, which is probably not what you might have been thinking, because that sends a message to students. The quickest way to get my attention is by having your attention on the task and being on track. And then we can go through and support other students. But keeping instruction moving is our goal here. So in the case of Paul, right, it allows us then to provide a moment to pause. Everybody's working, we're checking their cups. It allows us to have a brief moment to go over and attend to Paul, making sure we're not stopping instruction for everyone else. We do want to be mindful, as with earlier steps, that we're not calling students out in a public way. So we're really thinking about this private way, respectful way to redirect and get them back on track. As with every interaction with students, we're going to be calm. If our behavior is escalating, their behavior will escalate. And so we also want to be sincere. Inauthentic interactions, kids can pick up on really quickly, and that actually could escalate behaviors instead of having the effect that you intend. All right, so now why do we do it? We want to communicate that learning and positive social engagement are our priorities. So behavior does not shut instruction down in your classroom. And the way to best access my attention is by meeting expectations. So using that behavior-specific praise for the students who are doing the appropriate activity or engaging in the way that we hope, and acknowledging that first clearly sends that message. You know, our typical response might be scan the class for somebody off task and go directly to them, and we really want to flip that response so students understand what's expected and what's prioritized. And then when we think about what to avoid, being calm is key. Okay, for students in distress, and also to communicate to the other kids that you have everything under control. They can just continue in their learning. We have to remember that disruptive students also impact the other learners in the classroom. So by you remaining calm and in sort of like control, and I don't mean that in a tightly controlled way, but having sort of like the understanding and the big picture and keeping instruction moving forward sets the expectation for students to feel safe in that space. Also, as Allison mentioned, be mindful of your body language and your tone, right? We can say things in two different ways, and they are interpreted certainly different and meant different, especially the use of sarcasm. So even if you're using behavior-specific praise, but it has a tone of sarcasm or a negative tone, that is not meeting the intent of what you hope. So just be careful. Those things are often interpreted before the words that we're using. So we want to be mindful of that. All right, so we get a chance to chat about Paul. So on her way back to Paul, Mrs. Hill notices some students doing an excellent job of solving their selected problems and starting to check their work with their shoulder partner. Okay, what could Mrs. Hill say or do with the other students? Positive praise, nonverbal signals, yeah, acknowledging on-task behavior. Mrs. Hill looks at Liza and Bree and tells them, you both are doing a great job of explaining your answers. She hands them a ticket. Next, Mrs. Hill takes a calming breath, smiles at Paul, who is looking her way, and walks over to the lab station. In her mind, she thinks, you've got this. Okay, we have to acknowledge, right? Like sometimes this is hard on the adults too. And so just being calm, taking that breath is an important thing, and being ready to support Paul and engaging. Okay, now we're on to step 4. So we're going to think about now how we're moving back. We've got students working, right? We've provided that praise to gently redirect Paul and potentially some other students. And as in the previous steps, we're going to provide supportive redirection to the student, keeping it very clear and brief. This is not the time for Allison's over explaining and, conversation. So you could draw on some previous successes or examples when they met the expectation, right? To give them some sense that they know how to do this behavior. They've done it before. You've seen it. You recognize it. And it can also be effective to provide a few explicit actions. Of what they are, of what they could likely do. Okay, so I think about this like the high probability request sequences, right? Give them a couple things to get them started. Build that momentum on actually doing the task. So it might be pick the number to start with. Do you want to go ahead and pick up your pencil and get your name on the page? Which pencil are you going to use? Those kinds of things to help them get in the mode of instruction. Another helpful strategy here can be offering choice. Would you like to start with the evens or the odds? Would you prefer a mechanical pencil, or do you want to type your responses? Your goal is to get the student engaged in the learning activity quickly. So three quick things that you can do to move them toward engagement. Our goal is to never embarrass kids. We're trying not to escalate behavior when a student is having a hard time. We've recognized the distress. We've provided empathy. We're moving through the motion of keeping students engaged and providing time and so forth. So our goal is to quickly engage them in the learning. And like Allison said, we can acknowledge what's happening, but we can do it at a different time. For older students, it's important to keep in mind that when keeping expectations in place and doing it privately allows them to save face and not escalate behavior. Older kids would rather get in trouble with you than be embarrassed in front of their friends. That's a scenario that we as adults are not going to win, and so we don't want to engage with it, right? So just that really respectful approach. Also, this is, again, not a time for us to engage in long discussions about the implications, the causes of their behavior. The goal is to get them back on track, successful learning experience, and then there may be need for a private follow-up, but this isn't the time for it. Okay, so let's get back to Mrs. Hill and Paul. Mrs. Hill smiles at Paul and makes eye contact. She says, Paul, you did a great job with those problems yesterday. Remember the digestive system diagram you will need is right here in the book. And she points to the diagram in the book. The good news is that you can pick any 5 questions you would like. Mrs. Hill points to the answer sheet and says, which one would you like to start with? It's a really nice example of offering a choice, right? Setting him up for success. All right, in the chat, how could you keep instruction moving in your setting? So what are some practical examples from your own experiences to keep instruction moving? These are really wonderful ideas, really thoughtful. So continue to look at the ones that are in the chat. And if you want to add more, that would be wonderful and appreciate, because I think that sparks others' ideas in their own context. And we are going to invite you to go back. We're going to take a couple of minutes of quiet. And we invite you to go back to that same handout that you pulled out for thinking about empathy statements. And in this one, we invite you to add some ideas for how you keep instruction moving forward in your setting. In the previous step, we redirected the student and retaught the expectation. So for step 5, we're going to allow some students some space and time to make that choice, initiate the activity, get back on track with our expectation. It might take a time or take a moment for students to get started, right? And this has benefits for students and teachers. For you to walk away keeps you calmer and better able to keep supporting that student in a productive way, because you're not getting impatient or waiting. And so there are benefits to both of us for just pausing for a moment. By standing over the student, right? If we choose not to walk away, then we're tapping our foot, our arms are crossed, which is something I always do just because it's comfortable, but we're saying hurry up, right? We're providing those cues. And then we're less likely to give them that moment to actually make a choice. Think about a time where you've been under pressure to make a choice and how it can actually escalate your behavior, which is not what we're trying to do. Anytime any of us, including our students, even more so for young children as they're navigating new strong feelings, is shifting. Is they need a moment to shift, right? And so to move from one feeling or behavior to be able to accept kind of moving on to that activity that we're trying to engage them with, it takes a moment. So we're going to give them that time. And again, let's walk away, check in. If you're using your cups, you're checking with your green kids, you're checking in with your yellow kids, and then your red kids as well. All right, and this one, I feel like nothing else needs to be said. Avoid hovering. That never feels good, standing over kids in that pressure. Okay, so let's go back to Paul and see what has happened. After suggesting to Paul that he begin on either number 1 or 5, so that tells me that maybe Paul had a little bit of a hard time making a choice, and so Mrs. Hill actually narrowed it down for him. Mrs. Hill steps away to check on Ben, a student seated close to the lab station. She smiles at Ben, nodding at the progress he has made thus far, and says, "Great progress, Ben. Looks like you are just about ready to talk through your answers with Paul." Okay, also setting up an opportunity to for Paul to engage with that peer. All right, thank you, Mrs. Hill, for modeling that. All right, now this is the final step. We are on step 6. We're watching for the student to engage in that activity. So we've given them that time and that space. Now we're waiting for them to do it, right? And when we watch, when we see that it's happening, we want to make sure that we are acknowledging it. So depending on the student, it might be an approximation of a behavior or an actually full-on engage in the activity, right? So for some students, it might be that they have their pencil in their hand. That might be the first step. And you know that that's going to then carry them through to getting started. They might have their materials ready. They might have started one of the problems, right? So it doesn't have to be they've completed the assignment, but that they are making their way there. So we want to acknowledge that effort that they're making, even when it's been a hard day. You could use behavior specific praise here again, and you might give the praise along with a school wide reinforcer. So if your school is a PBIS school, Ci3T school, you likely have a token or a ticket, and you could use those as well. Keep in mind that we are looking for meeting expectations and not exceeding them. So students are not trying to make up for having a hard day. When they meet our expectation, that's when we want to acknowledge that. Again, we're avoiding those long discussions. It's just a quick touch point of that recognition and moving on. As a special ed teacher, I cannot tell you how many times in a co-teaching situation that I would work with a student on a particular skill or work with a student to try to re-engage with the learning, and when they did it, it wasn't recognized. And I think that sometimes the teachers were thinking, I don't want to recognize this because now he's on track, and so I don't want to take him off track by recognizing that. But feedback is really important for us and important for our learners. So we want to make sure that we're giving them, maybe it's behavior specific praise, maybe it's just a thumb up or acknowledgement or something, but something to let them know that they are now on track and moving forward. Exactly, Steph. That phrase that we all love. Okay, so now why we do this is just that feedback allows them to know they're meeting our expectations and they should keep going. They sometimes will ask for it if we don't provide it, and then that could be perceived as disruptive. So recognize them when they're on track so they can keep moving forward. And recognizing that sometimes that effort is hard and we appreciate it, right? We all have hard days. So like sort of knowing that they're getting back on track is important here. To here, we've taken a calm, respectful, private approach. So an over enthusiastic approach when they are back on track would not match the way that we have tried to address this in a private way. And so we want to make sure that we're not being overly like, yay, he's finally on track, classroom celebration. We don't want to do any of that. Our goal is just to keep them engaged and not working and moving forward.
But no building a tunnel for them to run into with your body.
As much as you want to. No theme song, right?
Personal happiness on the inside.
Exactly. You can be exploding on the inside, but not on the outside. Also keep in mind that you have to use really authentic and sincere words, right? Again, students will identify when it is not. And also keep in mind that sometimes it's difficult for students to hear praise when they don't hear it very often, right? They might not accept it. And so they might say something. So offer your praise, let them know you've given them feedback, and then move on. You don't need to respond if they have some sort of private reaction. Let's see how Paul handles it. So out of the corner of her eye, Mrs. Hill notices Paul has moved to sitting in a desk next to Ben and completed number 5. Yay! Inside. Okay, Mrs. Hill says, terrific, Paul. I appreciate you getting started. Thank you for sitting with Ben to talk through your answers. She hands both Paul and Ben a ticket. Paul somewhat reluctantly takes a ticket from Mrs. Hill and smirks a half smile. Thanks, Mrs. Hill. Are you ready, Ben? Right? So sometimes kids might be a little bit embarrassed by that, but that's okay. We're letting them know, we're giving them that feedback. Do you all have students that sound like Paul in your classroom? Yes, thank you for the head nods. Okay, so this is back to where we started. Allison did a really nice job of walking us through this infographic, which I agree, having it printed out in front of you builds fluency. It makes sure that you are keeping up with all of the steps. You can tell they're all sort of interrelated and connected with a common goal. And we are going to watch a quick video.
How to use the 6-step approach effectively. Although the 6-step approach for responding to challenging behaviors is pretty straightforward, there are some things to look out for at each step so that we can be sure we are using the steps most effectively. Step 1. Show empathy. When responding with empathy, avoid communicating in a harsh or public manner, such as expressing concern in front of the full class. This may embarrass the student instead of making them feel supported. You also want to avoid being overbearing during this step. Entering the student's personal space, for example, could be perceived as being hostile. When expressing empathy, avoid being long-winded. Short, to the point, calm, business-like statements are best. We want to consider timing, which may mean waiting for a break in instruction. Connect with the student in private rather than in public, and give them space while getting on their level, such as by kneeling a few feet away from their desk. Verbally express empathy by acknowledging what looks like a challenge, asking what is wrong, validating their emotions, and, if appropriate, offering help. Step 2. Maintain the flow of instruction. During this step, avoid engaging the student in an argument by becoming wordy in addressing the challenge or going into too much detail as to why it is important for them to get back to work. We don't want to provide too much attention at this time, either from you or from their peers, as this extra attention can be very reinforcing for some students, as can the chance to avoid their assigned work. Instead, after letting the student know you will be back in a moment, keep instruction moving forward in a positive, friendly tone. This might include explaining the instructions that are written on the board clearly and concisely before doing a brief check to make sure the instructions were clear to students. Step 3. Acknowledge other students meeting expectations. Keep a calm, sincere tone when providing positive feedback to other students. Sometimes an adult might feel a bit anxious knowing that the next step is to return to the student who was, or still is, struggling. We encourage teachers to take a breath, check how they are feeling, smile, and avoid raising their voice or using body language that communicates distress or frustration. Step 4. Redirect and reteach expected behavior. When redirecting and reteaching expected behaviors, avoid long, drawn-out explanations. Being wordy can make the student feel like they are being lectured or called out in front of their friends. Part of responding respectfully to challenging behaviors is setting a student up for success, not embarrassment, by giving them the guidance they need to move forward without a power struggle. Instead, politely redirect the student to the task at hand. Remind the student of what needs to be done and provide a brief, clear reteaching of the expected behavior. Step 5. Allow time and space. After providing the redirection, it is important not to hover next to the student. By giving time and space for the student to get back on track, we can again avoid creating any pressure between the student and the teacher. Instead, it is often helpful to pause while remaining close by in case the student has questions. If the student is still sending off-task, defiant, or non-compliant messages, still allow time and space. As educators, it is our job to set students up for success. We have done that by communicating support and encouragement and reminding the student of the expectation. Give yourself permission to move away and allow the student time to make the choice to get back on track. Step 6. Recognize and reinforce expected behavior when demonstrated. Avoid being too enthusiastic when the student demonstrates expected behavior, as that over-the-top reaction might be off-putting to a student. This is especially true for students who prefer to avoid adult attention. Also, avoid looking for the student to make up for their initial struggles by exceeding expectations. If the student is doing what was originally asked, that is worthy of acknowledgement. In other words, simply demonstrating the expected behavior, making a good choice, we might say, is worthy of acknowledgement. We hope these considerations are helpful to you as you implement the 6-step approach for responding to challenging behavior in your setting. For more information and additional resources, visit ci3t.org.
And that video is available to you. You can locate it within the module, and the Ci3T folks that are in your room can help you find that if needed. So we're going to move now into a breakout room and give you some time to reflect on all of these steps and explore the module, and your coach in that room is going to help facilitate you through these pieces. This is also an opportunity for you to be able to play around with the simulation. Some of you in our breakout room are asking for examples of teachers doing this, so these are some of the ways that you might be able to engage with that.
Wrap us up here with a few connections and looking ahead at what we have as future professional learning offerings. But as you might know and have heard from our wonderful speakers tonight, Allison and Wendy and everyone, and Kathleen to start us off, you just learned the 6-step instructional approach to responding to challenging behavior at Tier 1. This is the strategies, the steps that we use as part of our reactive plan for all students, showing empathy first, keeping instruction moving forward. And you might be saying things too, like, well, I don't think it's going to work with my student justice, or I've tried this, I've gone through all the steps, I do most of these things, but it doesn't work for this student. And the good news is that's okay. At Ci3T schools, we've got a plan for that. We have our Tier 2 intervention grids for some students that are going to need more, and we've got Tier 3 intervention grids as well. A lot of the low intensity strategies that you heard talked about tonight can actually be intensified to become Tier 2 strategies. While we use them all the time, all day long, throughout the day as Tier 1 for all students to maximize engagement and prevent challenging behavior, we can intensify them, target them, give higher rates of opportunities to respond and behavior-specific praise, and a few more pre-corrections to certain students, individuals, or small groups to help them out. So while we look at these Tier 2 supports that are available, there may be something helpful to your students that you have in mind, such as a behavior contract when they need something more than Tier 1's instruction, including that 6-step approach to challenging behavior. Maybe a social skills intervention would be helpful. So check your Ci3T implementation manual, and you'll have the Tier 2 intervention grids and Tier 3 intervention grids, and you'll see what's available at your school. And these are things that professional learning is being provided for. So all adults in the building, the teachers especially, know when they notice in their student level data from academic and behavior screening, my student needs more, or I tried this 6-step approach and I need something in addition to that. Good news, there's plans in place with our Tier 2 grids and Tier 3 grids. And we've got one coming up. Our next session for Project Empower is going to focus on a Tier 2 intervention called Recognize, Relax, Record. And this is to focus specifically for students' management of anxious thoughts and feelings to help increase academic engagement. So you might have been thinking, oh, what about internalizing behavior patterns? What can we do to support students there? Good news, we've got a module on it. And come to our next Empower and we'll walk you through it and engage in discussion around it and activities and breakout rooms. And just so you know, we've got a great research partner, a district that we work with, and we've had the opportunity to present with their faculty and staff, those that work with students in grades 3 through 5, to share this intervention. And over the last 3 years, we've had the honor of testing this intervention with them. And we're excited to be able to share this module now publicly, because it was behind a secret location for those involved in the study. It wasn't publicly available to everybody, but now it is. So join us for our next Project Empower session, and we'd be happy to share it with you, one of our internalizing interventions to support students with their anxious thoughts and feelings. After that, our final session in Empower, coming up in April, will help students to manage their acting out behaviors and to help students support to help teachers support those students by being able to recognize, based on the behaviors that I'm observing right now from this student, what phase of the acting out cycle are they in? Because if I can identify that, then I can use the corresponding strategies that I know will work with the students, because I've got my nice individualized de-escalation plan right here, handy dandy to look at. This is available as a module for your independent learning. And if you go back in our professional learning archives for Project Empower, we have a recording for it. Because even better, perhaps, our final session that is in April is going to be on functional assessment-based interventions. One of the most versatile interventions that you can do. It's a little more resource intensive, but it allows you to find the function for challenging behaviors and to build a intervention that's function based to provide a replacement behavior that serves the same or nearly the same function so the students can access or avoid the same things that they were doing with their challenging behavior, but now in a pro-social acceptable way. So come join us for that April session and learn about functional assessment-based interventions. And there's a whole series of modules, starting with introduction, like you see the image there. If you scroll down on that Enhancing Ci3T Modules page, on our website, you'll find that red section and the introduction, plus there's 5 more for each of the 5 steps that you follow in this systematic process to connect your FBA, Functional Behavioral Assessment, with your BIP or BIP, Behavior Intervention Plan, Functional Assessment-Based Intervention. So come take a look at that in April. Join us then. As you wrap up this evening, thinking about plans, especially if you're here with any of your school colleagues or if you're taking this information back to your colleagues, we encourage you to take a moment and on your either agenda that you have for your Ci3T leadership team or building leadership team where you are, you might jot down some actionable items. Not just what to do, but who's going to be responsible for doing it or who needs to coordinate doing it and when are they going to complete it by, and even a place to check it off that it's done. That way we're making these plans and more likely to follow through them by having the named person and date. And something you might do is locate your school's reactive plan. Do you have a flow chart? Or maybe it's a set of definitions for level A behaviors, level B behaviors, majors, minors. Maybe it's not in a flow chart form, but maybe you like that, what was presented today, and you might want to adapt it or modify for it. But see what your school's reactive plan is. And then look, does it have those 6 steps that we covered today? Does it start with showing empathy first? Can you bring it to your leadership team? That's the third one here as an idea. What can you print out or share or email to your colleagues and get this information into their hands to help all the adults in the building know how to respond instructionally to challenging behavior when it does occur? We're doing all the things to prevent it with our low intensity strategies and everything else, but it will occur. So we're ready to show empathy first and keep the instruction flowing in all the steps that we learned tonight. So how can we share this with our colleagues? The infographics are printable in the module. You can email the link to the page for the Enhancing Ci3T modules. Maybe you could even present at a coming faculty and staff meeting. Share some of the steps that you learned, well, all the steps that you learned, but some of the surrounding information to give extra information. Maybe you can get 5 minutes in front of faculty and staff and just tell them about it, introduce it to them, and then they can have the link to learn more in the module. If you get the gift of time and can do more, do more. There's slides in a PowerPoint that you can use to present this information. And remember, each of the modules has that, what we call interactive resource. On the very first page, you can click on the cover image, or there's a gray box with another link that takes you there also to the interactive resource, which is, as Kathleen likes to say, a tricked out PowerPoint. It's a narrated PowerPoint where it covers the same information in the module that would be like an ebook with the chapters on the side for your table of contents. But now it's read to you. It's presented in a more audiovisual format. And I've seen people and I've worked with people at schools to just push play and let certain parts of it play for the faculty and staff, and then they pause it and have a discussion as either a whole group or in small group breakouts. So consider doing that and sharing this information in that form with your faculty and staff. Share with them also the final 2 Empower sessions coming up. And maybe on your to-do list is for yourself to register for our final 2 sessions on that internalizing behavior patterns intervention that recognize, relax, record on March 25th. Or maybe you're interested in that Tier 3 support for functional assessment-based interventions, or FABI, on April 28th. The flyers there in our professional learning tab. There's the QR code for people to register. If you go to the professional learning tab, you can click to register. So share that with colleagues, register yourself. We hope to see you at our final 2 for the year. And if you'd like more individualized support, if you have questions, we have what we might even consider free consulting. Whereas, other people and trainers and coaches and researchers would charge hundreds of dollars an hour, for free once a month. You can come to these, what we call trainers and coaches calls. You don't have to be a Ci3T trainer or a Ci3T coach. Come with your questions regarding Ci3T implementation or regarding the training series if you're building your model. And we're happy to answer them. It's like open mic for Ci3T. There's no prepared PowerPoints. We will talk about updates from our research and what we're learning and what we can share that's new in our world, but we open it up to questions and we try to collect questions as we get them each month and save them for these sessions, because this is the time to not only learn from us, but yourselves, your colleagues, your peers across different schools and districts and states and regions. And that's where I think the best learning comes from, to hear what other schools are doing and what has worked for them. And even sometimes more importantly, what they've tried and were not so successful with. So you can learn from them and make modifications so it would be more successful for you. This flyer that you see on the left is also on that professional learning tab on ci3t.org. It's got a QR code, or there's a link there on the website that you can register just to get reminders. You don't have to come, but if you sign up, you'll get the reminders. And if you can make it, fantastic. They're not recorded. It's a safe place to ask your questions and get your answers and connect with other people at other schools implementing Ci3T. We'd also love it if you would share any updates and successes that you have around Ci3T on social media. Just tag us with hashtag Ci3T on any of the platforms, especially Instagram. We're at Ci3T Model. Share us there, tag us with your inaction, pictures of expectation matrix, or successes with integrated lesson plannings, or something that you do with this 6-step instructional approach to responding to challenging behavior. Share a little success, post it, tag us. We'd love to see it. So thanks everybody for a great evening. We're going to stick around and hang out with you, answer any questions that you might have, or just have a little social time if you like. Otherwise, we hope to see you at our next Project Empower session.